friends. Welcome to Sky House Herbs podcast. I'm Ashley Ellenboss, a clinical herbalist, and in this space, I share my knowledge and experience with plant medicine to help you on your own journey of healing and transformation. Join me in exploring the ancient wisdom of plant spirit medicine and how it can be used to heal the body, mind, and spirit. We'll talk to experts in the field and share stories from people who've been transformed by powerful plant allies. New episodes are released each Monday, so please subscribe. And now, let's explore this mystical world of plant medicine together. Hey y'all, welcome in. Today we'll be talking about the herb of the month, Skullcap. This is an amazing herb if you struggle with issues in your nervous system, maybe you have a little bit of digestive problems, or if you're overall looking for a plant that's going to support your well-being, your mental health, and also your nervous system health. It is superb. And one of the reasons I love this plant so much is because of its taste. It's got a very unique flavor profile that most people really enjoy. It's got this minty tone to it because it's in the mint family. It's a part of the Lamiaceae family. But it's also got this complex, I want to call it musky, sweet floral flavor that is partly because of some of the aglycones, some of the alkaloids that are in this plant. But its flavor is very complex and most people find it quite pleasant. However, it is most pleasant when drank as a tincture or taken as a tincture. As a tea, some of those more bitter compounds come out, and that can be a little hard for most people with a Western palate to take. However, if you mix it with a little bit of something sweet like cinnamon, a little bit of honey, sometimes that will take that flavor off. But overall, it's very wonderful. What the part that's used are the above ground parts. That means everything that's from the earth up. Ideally, when it's in flower is when you harvest it and make a tincture or dry it for a tea. So the leaves, the stem, and the flowers are all medicinal. We don't use the roots medicinally, at least not for the indications I'm describing. So we're going to stick to just the above ground parts. This plant is excellent for the nervous system. Pretty much most nervous system complaints will be helped or supported with the use of Skullcap. Now, having said that, it does have very specific markers. While it will help most people, it will help a certain class of those people even more profoundly, because what we're always trying to do, and I'm always trying to do as an herbalist, is be a matchmaker. I'm always trying to match the specific symptoms that a person has, their specific energetics with a particular plant. And that's when you can have the most effective match. So as I describe this plant, see if it resonates with a lot of the things that are showing up for you. One thing that this plant does specifically is it helps the mind when there's too many things happening. And one of my teachers at MUIH, or Maryland University of Integrative Health, when I went there, it was called Thai Sophia. James Snow said was that this herb Skullcap is really good for people whose minds are busy and it's like a warm blanket wrapped around their head. So if you tend to be a person where your mind feels like there's so many plates up in the air, you have so many things going on, you're feeling so overwhelmed and you're exhausted by that overwhelm, maybe because that overwhelm is keeping you from sleeping. The overwhelm is keeping you from getting things organized and getting your SH blank blank together, in case there's kids listening, right? If your overwhelm is keeping you from replenishing yourself in different ways, then Skullcap might be a really nice fit for you. The other thing that kind of a key phrase I think of with Skullcap is that it brings chaos into order. So anytime there's chaos in the nervous system, in the mind, in the gut, it starts to bring it back to order. And this is actually seen in the plant itself. So this plant, the Latin name is Scutellaria lateriflora. And the stem has these lateral flowers. So that's where it gets its second part of its Latin binomial name, is because all of the flowers arrange themselves on one side of the stalk. And so there's a lot of order in this plant. There's a lot of order. And now, where does this plant grow? This also tells us about its medicine. Skullcap also grows in wetlands. It likes boggy areas. It likes streams and creeks and rivers. It likes to grow along the edges of rivers, creeks, streams, and marshy areas. So it likes to have its feet wet, and it likes to have very protein-rich material to draw from. So, in this way, it takes a lot of things that are interspersed with water and it organizes them and brings them into a self sustaining life force, which is something that's so beautiful about the way plants work is that plants they organize things in our system. And when we find the right match, it can bring things in our organism into order as well. This plant, interestingly enough, was used to treat hydrophobia or the fear of water. And the way that they came about this is interesting, but it does for me draw me back to the idea that this plant grows in water. And where a plant grows tells us about what it can do. Now, not all, cattails and a lot of other marsh plants don't necessarily cure us of hydrophobia. However, it helps to work with the water element. And for me, the water element in my studies is water isn't just the actual physical element of water, but it's also representative of the emotions and the emotional body. So if we have fears around emotional items or emotional issues, if we feel like, uh, emotions are scary, emotions are overwhelming, emotions are bad, emotions need to be controlled, right? Any of those sorts of patterns, then you might find Skullcap to be really helpful in bringing you into the water in a very safe way. But the way that they actually, or old herbalists found out about this use of this plant was because they found that it was helpful for it was a treatment that was used in cases of rabies. And one of the symptoms of rabies, which I never knew, I thought this was so interesting, is fear of water, like an unusual fear of water. So when someone is bitten by an animal who is infected with rabies, and then they themselves get rabies, they will want to move as far away from water as possible. And even like a cup of drinking water will totally terrify them. It is completely a very irrational fear of water. And so that's actually one of the ways that they kind of went backwards is they started using this plant as a cure for rabies and some of the nervousness and the viral qualities that people with rabies exhibit, or some of the symptoms that they exhibit. They found skullcap to be a useful plant for this, and it got rid of the hydrophobia, which is part of the whole rabies symptomology picture. But even when we take it, I think rabies is not a common thing we see in our society today, thankfully. However, hydrophobia can be, or fear of the emotions can be. So I find that this is actually a very helpful place to use this herb. Another one of my herbalist friends, Seven Song, who is a herbal teacher who lives up in Ithaca, New York. He has a wonderful herb school called the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine. I wanted to read to you what he says about this plant because I find this to also be a way that I use skullcap. For people who have an emotional attachment to their injury, this is common. When a person thinks about how they sprained their ankle or got stung, there's an upsetting emotional quality to it. With this type of person, you may see them blaming themselves for the injury. I knew I shouldn't have run that trail. I knew I shouldn't have gone up that hill. Skullcap may relieve the physical pain and some of the emotional pressure. And this is from his monograph on skullcap on his website, and I'll include a link. But isn't that interesting too? So when someone has an injury and they have a traumatic response to it and they get stuck in the water of that emotional response, skullcap is a great medicine, and it can aid in the healing because we know that when a person is stuck in a trauma state, that this is going to actually exacerbate inflammation. It's going to slow down the immune response. So if we want a person to heal more quickly from anything, any injury, traumatic or otherwise, we can use skullcap as a nervine to calm their nervous system, to bring down their emotional state, and that's going to speed up the actual physical healing as well. This herb is one that I often use for people that, as I mentioned, have a lot of things up in the air. They have lots of things they're trying to balance at the same time, and they feel a lot of overwhelm. So one of the main things I talk about when I think about this herb is bringing order to chaos. So if there's a lot of chaos, this herb brings things into a place where they seem more manageable. And so if that's you, consider taking some skullcap. And I use this plant personally after I had my second daughter and I was dealing with a little bit of postpartum depression. I just felt overwhelmed, not only because of the reality of having two small kids and running a business and running a household, and just there was so much going on. And I had used Skullcap in the past for feelings of overwhelm. And I just was like, I know I need Skullcap. So I got myself some Skullcap and I started taking 2 droppers full every morning. And I found that by noon, I was handling my life a lot better. I had a lot more agency. I was able to take charge, and rather than feeling like I couldn't, almost paralyzed by having so many things to do, I started being able to take agency and take one thing at a time and take care of the things I needed to take care of without that feeling of being kind of stuck in paralysis. So that was one way that I really found it to be helpful, and it's safe to use when breastfeeding. This herb has a long history of use, and there's no science, or there's no clinical trials or anything that's shown that it has any ill health effects when used in correct dosage. Of course, with anything in high doses, it can be dangerous. But this plant is I would consider this one to be a relatively safe plant in both pregnancy and in breastfeeding. However, follow the advice of your doctor. This is not medical advice. I am not a doctor, so always consult with your medical practitioner before taking any herbs. Uh, this herb also was used for convulsions. That was one of its old historical uses. And I do want to say this about skullcap, is that this is not an old world plant, meaning that this plant doesn't have a long history of use from European folkloric knowledge or traditional herbal use. This is a New World plant. So this herb is an herb of North America. And so a lot of what we learned about it originally came from the Native American uses. And so the Native American uses, especially the Cherokee and the Iroquois people, they used it for menstrual issues along with other herbs. So as I was doing my research, it looks like skullcap was used most often in combination with other plants. So it was used for menstrual issues, and it was also used in blends to clear energy from spaces that had been cursed or had been, there had been sickness in the space. It was used as a cleansing herb, brewed as a tea and sprayed, and also burned. But the use of it for convulsions is something that's really interesting. So it was used for possession. That was one of the uses. But we also see that it has been helpful both in more modern cases for tremors and tics. So, for example, Saint Vitus's dance, which is a type of neurological disorder, and also for tremors. And this could be both essential tremors and also tremors that come on that are related to other nervous system disorders. Twitchings, tics in speech. These would be places I would think of skullcap. Again, think about bringing things from chaos back into order. So when the nervous system has some dysregulation, this herb helps to bring things back into a more fine-tuned place. It kind of is like a tuning fork to bring the rest of the nervous system back into harmony. This herb has been used for neuralgia or nerve pain, for nervous irritation, irritability, for menstrual pains. And there was also a documented case where it was combined with passion flower in the early 1900s to help with opium addiction. And I have used this herb a lot in formulas where I'm working with addictions, specifically with tobacco. However, I think it could be applicable to uses of other types of addiction, and certainly where there is opium, because there is the morphine receptors. This plant tends to plug some of the same nicotinic receptors and some of the opioid receptors as well. So that's kind of an interesting thing. It also works on the GABA alpha receptors in the brain, which regulate anxiety. It basically decreases anxious thoughts and anxiety. So we can think about this herb as being a really helpful one for working on the brain, along with things like passion flower, for easing symptoms of anxiety, insomnia. And again, if we think specifically where there is some kind of interesting attachment or maybe avoidance of the emotions or obsessiveness. Sometimes I think of this herb as being good for people who have OCD. There's sort of an obsessive quality that brings them into states of chaos. So, looking at those links with the emotional body, if that feels resonant, if you're like, yeah, I'm pretty avoidant of my emotions. I tend to get overwhelmed. Sleep isn't great. Yeah, and I find myself sometimes getting anxious. Sometimes big changes or transitions are hard for me. And yeah, I sometimes get frozen when faced with too many options. Then I would say this is a time for Skullcap. So give it a try. You can start low dose. Even 3 drops as an energetic dose is something that's been recommended. That's how Matthew Wood doses this plant, is 3 drops of the tincture several times a day. You can go higher with it for a more therapeutic dose. I would think of maybe like 5 milliliters, which is about a teaspoon, a few times a day. So that would be to be like 2 to 3 droppers full. So when you squeeze the dropper and then you pull the herb back up into it, it usually fills up that dropper portion about halfway. That's considered to be a dropper full. So you could do 3 of those, which equals about a teaspoon, and do that in the mornings and in the evenings. And you can even do an afternoon dose if you feel like you need that support during the midday hours as well. And that would be the way I would recommend taking it. And you can always start smaller and move up. You could start with 1 dropper full twice a day, see how that goes, and then increase until you find a dose where you get that hit, where you feel like, oh, whew, I'm starting to feel a little bit more self-organized. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you've tried Skullcap, and if you find this plant to be helpful for you. Also, if there's any comments or questions that you have, I always love to hear from you guys. So please do add those into the comment box. And as always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do click the subscribe button and like this video if you enjoyed it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again.